Shakespeare's Othello begins in the middle of an argument between Rodrigo and Iago. You could use the term in medias res. It's a Latin term literally meaning in the middle of things. It's intriguing for us as members of the audience. I can't help feeling it's another strategy on Shakespeare's part to start a play in a way that's going to grab the attention of the rabble-like groundlings in the globe. Think about it. There's no PA system, no lighting to centre your attention on the stage. Whatever happens in the opening scene has to grab the public's attention or you've failed. It could be a ghost or a fight or three evil witches, but structurally you see Shakespeare doing it over and over again. In this case, we want to know more about the argument. We're revelling in our opportunity to eavesdrop. Today, we're going to focus on a character who doesn't get as much attention as he deserves, I think, in most published criticism of the play, Rodrigo. At the beginning of the play, he's rich, he's in love, and he's been paying Iago in an attempt to forward his suit to Desdemona. He's also an idiot, a dimwit, a fop. Shakespeare wrote Othello only 2 or 3 years after Twelfth Night, so some people think that the actor who played Sir Andrew Aguecheek in Twelfth Night could have played Rodrigo too in Othello. Any sympathy we might have for Rodrigo and his gullibility and vulnerability at the hands of Iago is probably quelled though by his willingness to label Othello as thick lips. The racial slurs might originate in the mouth of Iago, but Rodrigo uses them too, as a weapon in his quest to secure the hand of Desdemona. I suppose the question as to whether you can view Rodrigo as a comic character will perhaps hinge on whether you view his depiction of Othello to Brabantio when he talks, for instance, of the gross clasps of a lascivious Moor as vile racism, or evidence that he will misguidedly just say and do whatever Iago asks him to say or do because he's too dim-witted to do anything else. Certainly, Brabantio's initial response when he realises that it's Rodrigo who's waking him up at this unearthly hour suggests a sense of weary impatience at an irritating but harmless pest. Listen to him when he says, "I have charged thee not to haunt about my doors. In honest plainness thou hast heard me say, thy daughter is not for thee. And now in madness, being full of supper and distempering draughts, upon malicious knavery dost thou come to start my quiet?" Yes, he's angry at being woken up in the middle of the night, but the tone is one of comparatively mild irritation and exasperation, isn't it? Rather than passionate fury. It's also hilarious, I think, that Brabantio doesn't recognise Rodrigo's voice. Look at their conversation. Rodrigo has to say, "Most Reverend Signor, do you know my voice?" Brabantio replies, "Not I. What are you?" This man's been pestering him for weeks for a chance with his daughter and he can't even recognise his voice. Rodrigo has to say, "My name is Rodrigo." How humiliating is that? He turns up expecting to be the first person on the mind of the father of the object of his affections, and he has to almost introduce himself. To me, though, one of the most interesting things about Shakespeare's portrayal of Rodrigo in this scene is the way that Iago silences him. In the first few lines, Rodrigo is furious. "Tush, never tell me," he says. "I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who hast had my purse as if the strings were thine, shouldst know of this." Iago's counter to this begins with an oath. "Splud," he says, short for God's blood. Now, in an age where, depending on where you live, you're probably used to people blaspheming pretty regularly, this might not seem too shocking to you, but to a Jacobean audience, it would immediately have presented Iago as a villain. It certainly has the desired impact of quashing Rodrigo. It shocks him, I think. From this point on, Iago will shift the course of the conversation round to himself, and his resentment at the way that he has allegedly been treated by Othello and being overlooked for promotion. He succeeds in manipulating the situation into one where he and Rodrigo share a common enemy. And in doing so, he utilises a tool that we'll see Iago use over and over again. He speaks and speaks and speaks. Notice how he barely lets Rodrigo get a word in, either when they're on their own or when they wake Brabantio. Iago struggles to cope with Rodrigo's ineptitude in rousing Brabantio and stirring him into action. Initially, he even coaches him how to do it, giving him instructions regarding tone and volume. He says, "Do with like timorous accent and dire yell, as when by night and negligence the fire is spied in populous cities. Shout up to his window," he says. "Scream, yell, shout for all you're worth." Rodrigo has a go at it, and Iago is less than impressed. He takes over, frustrated at Rodrigo's pitiful attempt, using more exclamatives and rhetoric than Rodrigo could muster up. When he says, "Awake! What ho, Brabantio! Thieves! Thieves! Look to your house, your daughter and your bags! Thieves! Thieves!" Later on, Iago interrupts Rodrigo, who begins by addressing Brabantio with apparent respect and a degree of humility, saying, "Most grave Brabantio, in simple and pure soul I come to you." But look at how the language changes when Iago takes over again. "Zoons, sir, you are one of those that will not serve God if the devil bid you, because we come to do you service and you think we are ruffians. You'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse, you'll have your nephews knee to you, you'll have coursers for cousins and jennets for Germans." Iago is the master of rhetoric to antagonise. Speech is everything to Iago. And if we're looking for the significance of Rodrigo here, one point that we could make is that he acts as a foil to Iago in this respect. Shakespeare deliberately juxtaposes Rodrigo's incompetence with Iago's eloquent manipulation. Iago dominates the conversation, steers the conversation, uses the conversation for his own ends. For Iago, that's what life is all about, using speech to deceive, to control and to wreak havoc. By the end of the play, when he says, "From this time forth I never will speak word," the reason he stops speaking is that his power to use speech in these ways has been stripped from him. Once the truth about him is out, there is no point in speaking. He becomes silenced by his own downfall.